Greetings and welcome to our daily walk through the scriptures, Holy Week edition. Today we're going to be addressing Tuesday of Holy Week. Now, there is a lot that happens here on the Tuesday of Holy Week. We see in Matthew, Mark, and Luke various accounts of what Jesus did, and they're really broken into two sections. So in order to do today's reading, you need to be prepared and understand that it is a lot of reading. Okay, especially in Matthew, because in Matthew, we see it starts in Matthew 21, verse 23, but it goes all the way through Matthew chapter 24, verses 25. And then in Mark, it starts in chapter 11, verse 27, but it goes all the way through chapter 13, verse 37. And then Luke chapter 21 and Luke 20 and Luke 21 all cover this. Now, you say, why is there so much reading having to do here? Well, that's because this contains really the last of Jesus' sermons, the last of his teachings. We'll go into that in a minute, but first, the day starts a little bit differently. You see, the day starts with Jesus back in the temple, and Jesus is having conversations, and he's really facing the last of his tests from the religious leaders. Now, why is this significant? Well, it's because ultimately this is going to be the thing that, the straw that breaks the camel's back, if you will. This is going to be the thing that decides to them that they are going to finish Jesus off. At this point, you need to understand that they have already had conversations with Judas. Okay, Judas, when they came in to Palm Sunday, Judas had conversations during that weekend with the religious leaders. So there was already a plot to get Jesus and capture Jesus. Yet this kind of, like I said, is the straw that breaks the camel's back. And so Jesus begins with a series of parables in Matthew chapter 21 that are really not veiled. They're very clear about the religious leaders and how this covers the religious leaders, and talking about the parable of the wedding banquet in chapter 22 and continuing to do these testings. And he receives a number of testings in Matthew, Mark, and Luke from these religious leaders. Finally, they give up. Finally, they recognize they're not going to trap Jesus in the way that they thought they would. They tried it from all different ways. They tried, hey, what was the greatest commandment? What about the Messiah? Whose son is the Messiah? What about taxing money? All sorts of different things that they had conversations on trying to trap Jesus, and finally, they give up. And so then Jesus proceeds out into the Mount of Olives. Now, the Mount of Olives is kind of a little hillscape area that's on the way between where Jesus would have come in from Bethany and Jerusalem. And Jesus goes out there and he teaches. And we call this, and I've talked about this in our daily walk for 1 year, the Olivet Discourse. Now, the significance of the Olivet Discourse is that it is really a conversation about the end times. It's talking about what is going to happen at the end of days. And Jesus gives a series of signs that people could look for. Now, obviously, we have taken these and we like to analyze them quite a bit. And you have had people throughout the centuries that have been convinced that they live in the times of the end days. And they can argue the Olivet Discourse shows them that. And you know what? They obviously weren't right yet. But that doesn't mean they can't be right today. We don't really know what comes and when comes the end of days. Scripture tells us that we should be prepared regardless. We should be ready to meet Jesus at any moment. We should be prepared. Jesus himself says he's going to come like a thief in the night. That's part of the conversation of the Olivet Discourse. And so I highly encourage you to read it, because these are important conversations that Jesus is going to have with his disciples and with all of the other people. They're not going to fully understand them yet, but they will. But remember, in verse 36 of Matthew chapter 24, Jesus reminds us that the day and the hour are unknown, but instead we should be prepared. This week of all weeks, we should especially take time to be prepared. We need to understand and recognize that God is continually preparing for that day. Everything that we see now is preparation for that day. So whether Jesus comes at this moment or Jesus comes in another 100 years, we need to be ready and prepared for whatever God has for us. Okay, so that's what Jesus did on Tuesday. Oh, there was one more thing I forgot, a very important thing. On their way back into town on Tuesday, something of significance. You remember what happened yesterday when it came to the fig tree? Well, guess what happens? The fig tree, they walk by it again yet today on Tuesday, and sure enough, the fig tree has withered. It has died. And the disciples were amazed. And this is a very, as I said yesterday, a very symbolic gesture talking about what now is about to happen and what Jesus' death is going to mean, not just for the people of Israel, but for the entire world. Okay, more to come tomorrow.